Department of American Studies, and I'm also a member of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project. And I'm just going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll give the presentations in the order I introduce people in, and then we'll have some time at the end, I hope, for your questions. So first up is Ms. Violetta Sharps-Jones. She is an historian and genealogist of African American history, especially in Prince George's County, but also more broadly. And she is a founding board member of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project. So she'll start us out with a brief history of Lakeland, and then next we will hear from Courtney Thurston. And Courtney, thank you so much for managing the technology here for us, as you always do. Courtney is a master's student in African American Studies at Morgan State University. She's a community designer for the Lakeland Digital Archive, and she's a board member of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project. And makes herself valuable in so many different ways. And I didn't check to see if you had changed your title. So Lakeland's Legacy, the Value of Black Land and Community, and Courtney will be talking a bit about urban renewal. And then I'll give the third talk. I'm gonna just introduce you to the Lakeland Community Heritage Project and focus especially on the Lakeland Digital Archive. And then we will have Mr. Robert Thurston. He is a Lakeland resident and also president of the Lakeland Civic Association. As I say later in my talk, I think we all think of him as an honorary member of the Lakeland Digital Archive team as well. And so he will finish up talking about Lakeland today and looking into the future. The Lakeland Civic Association has put together a sort of vision and strategic planning document for Vision 2025. So that's it. And I think we can turn things over to Ms. Violetta Sharps-Jones. Thanks so much. And thank you, Hayden, for organizing all of this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Hayden, and thank you for all that had hands in putting this program together. Courtney, you can start. I'm going to talk to you briefly about how Lakeland got started. Basically, this is Lakeland's journey. We know that it was established by Edwin Newman in 1890, and it was his vision to create a lakeside community, inviting many of his friends from Washington, D.C. to come out and buy homes or build homes that would support this lakeside community. It was his vision that it would become their weekend homes, summer homes, etc. And he pursued that mission. He also advertised heavily in the local newspapers and surrounding areas. And it is through that advertisement and word of mouth that we think that a lot of the first Lakelanders, Black Lakelanders, came there in search of a new place to expand their families and in some cases start their families. On this photograph, you have a picture of Edwin Newman. And also these are my great-grandparents, James Johnson and Nanny Walls Johnson. And they migrated from Westmoreland County, Virginia, Colonial Beach, sometime between 1890 and 1900. The first record I have of them is on the 1900 census. And I do know that they came with 6 children, and their 7th child was actually born in Lakeland sometime around 1897. So I can document that their journey started at that time. Next page, Courtney. And Lakeland, it's important for you all to know that Lakeland's success or Lakeland's story is based on families. The families that came in the beginning and the families that came later. You will find with Lakeland's history, the families that were there in the beginning are also the families that are there presently, and certainly they were there at the time of urban renewal in the 70s. The families expanded in Lakeland we were a very close-knit group and somehow all connected. I hope someday to be able to show you a tree to show you how connected everyone was. And this picture on the right is my mom, dad, my sister, and I'm the baby on the left. That's the Sharps family. And to just show you how the community connections work, my mom was born in Berwyn. However, her grandparents were living in Lakeland. So she moved back to Lakeland in 1935 into the family house after her grandmother had passed. And my dad, whom she married in 1946, he's from the neighboring community. He was born in Hyattsville, and then in teenage years, he moved to North Brentwood. So that connects our family with those communities. I love the picture of Harriet Hughes and her family. You have multiple generations here. You have her daughters, you have granddaughters, and great-grandchildren. And Harriet Hughes was extremely important to the Lakeland community. So through my research, I discovered that on the 1910 census record, she's listed as a nurse. And then later, when I delved into my family history more, I found my mom's birth certificate, and Harriet Hughes is listed as the midwife on her birth certificate. So that's a very important piece of history for Lakeland. Most Lakelands during that time period did not make it to a hospital. They had their births at home. Even I was born in the family home. I didn't make it to a hospital, and that was several years later. But it's important to know that even though one family member, in the case of Miss Hughes, one of her daughters, I believe, moved away to New York, but she came back frequently to visit, so she never lost her connection to Lakeland. Next page. Early in the establishment of Lakeland, I'm sure the Lakelanders, when they got started, they immediately wanted to recognize that they needed to give thanks. The people that journeyed to Lakeland in the beginning, in most cases, they were born enslaved. If they were not born enslaved, they certainly had firsthand information from their parents who were enslaved. So religion and faith was extremely important to them. The churches started in family homes, and then gradually they were able to build churches. The two churches you see featured here, Embry AME, established in 1903, and the First Baptist Church. Those two churches are still in Lakeland today. Throughout the generations, the churches were very important, not just in a spiritual way, but it also represented the social activities that we had. And those social activities expanded to other communities. Always you had churches from neighboring communities and Washington, D.C. visiting on a regular basis to fellowship or for a particular gospel program and other outings, just a homecoming celebration. And that's how we connected to the various communities, not just the ones along the Route 1 corridor, Washington, D.C. and other areas. It seems that we were always having visiting groups and organizations from other places coming into Lakeland. Next slide. The other thing that was extremely important, we recognized early that we wanted to educate our kids. So this is a picture of the school that was established in 1915. And the other is a land record that we found where the people of Lakeland went to Edwin Newman and his wife and asked for land so that they could build their first school. And that was granted to them in 1903. Next page. And this picture is showing you the different schools. The ledger is a page from a document that I located during my research, and it's from 1904. And when I found this, I was just so amazed that every name on there I recognized as a family that I knew, a family that I had grown up with, a family that my mom had grown up with. And those families were not only in the community when urban renewal came through, but some of those families are still there: the Grays, the Brookses, the Stewarts, Browns, Hills. Those are very important people in establishing the Lakeland community, growing their families, and recognizing that Lakeland was the place that they wanted to continue growing their families. The other are two of this showing a class. I believe the class that you're seeing is from 1930. When I first looked at this picture, I said, some of these faces I recognize, and it didn't take me long before I spotted my mom, who must have been, I would say she was probably in second grade then. My mom, a lot of my cousins and everybody, all the families I recognized. I couldn't identify all of them, but it was interesting when we would sit in a group with the Lakeland Community Heritage Project, various people could pick out their grandparents or their parents. So it was very interesting to see that. And that particular schoolhouse, I really feel connected to because it was located directly behind our family home. And the bottom is a picture of that schoolhouse. Next page. This is a picture that's depicting how Lakelanders survived. We know that they were farmers. We know that they were laborers. We know that they worked for the railroad, later the streetcar or metro system, but they also contributed largely to the University of Maryland, whether they were working in the kitchen or doing domestic work or working the grounds or tilling the land. We are hopeful that we will be able to document a lot of the history. The Dory family, I found an article in the newspaper where it dates that their connection to the University of Maryland was from 1893. And I think it was at least 5 or 6 generations that continued to work at the university. The other picture is the College Park Air Station, which when we located this, when the Lakeland Community Heritage Project was given this photo, it's very interesting and surprising that we found 5 Lakeland members that were employed by the university. When I further did research on them, I discovered that they were part of the Brooks family, part of the Lomax family, and Hill family. And they were listed as mechanic helpers and mail carriers for the College Park Airport. Next switch. And socially, Lakeland did a variety of things. We had social organizations. You see pictures here of the Counts and the Duchess. We're not sure what their theme was, but we know that they did look good. They dressed well, and they hosted a lot of parties. What other things they did, I'm not quite sure, but I am very proud when I see this picture and see how well the gentlemen looked and the ladies. We also were big into sports, baseball. I found articles where we even participated in horseshoe tournaments, dodgeball, baseball, basketball, and of course we ran track. We also had a variety of things that we did during the summer months, and these are all things that connected the different communities. When I look at the bottom picture with the Duchess, I can see faces of people that I knew that lived in Merkert and Beltsville and Laurel. So I know that those families were connected through, not just through Lakeland High School, but even prior to that, they were connected either through marriages or just social, just visiting those various communities. One of the best activities that Lakeland did during the summer, and this dated back to the 40s, was we visited what was then the Black Beach, which was down in Annapolis, Cars Beach. There were two of them, Cars Beach and Sparrows Beach. And this was a very exciting part of our social activities as far back as the 40s, up until the beach closed, I believe, in the 70s. But it was a way of connecting with all of the communities, because there would be certain days when North Brentwood would go to Cars Beach, Hyattsville people would go to Cars Beach, Beltsville, Mercury, Lakeland, and we all combined. The churches would load up, and each church would have 2 to 3 buses or more going to Cars Beach, and that would be one of our outings. Later, when what was the forerunner of Maryland Park and Planning, we just called them the rec centers. They also the different community rec centers would also, as a part of their summer programs, would take kids to the beach and to other amusement parks in other areas. Next page. Lakelanders served in the military from World War I, World War II, Vietnam, you name it. We were patriotic. We were loyal. It was important to us. And I understand that as each period closed, Lakeland would host large parades for their soldiers coming home. And that was a big celebration that we had. Next page. And this is the signage when the urban renewal process is starting. And to me, it saddens me when I see that sign, because I know that was the beginning of, I'm not going to say the Lakeland being destroyed, but certainly it changed it. It did have a great effect on the growth of Lakeland. It certainly had an effect on displacing many of those generations of families that were connected to Lakeland. Next page. And this, I'd just like to say, this is just the final. No longer do you see homes in this space, or you don't see people in this space. And these steps are just a reminder of what has been lost and taken away from Lakeland. And as I stated, families were just key to us. This is a family that combines the Campbells and the Adams family. And how it even shows that the Campbell family connected with the Edwards family. All of those families have been in Lakeland since the 1900 or early 1900s. And the Smith family, and some of the Smith family, or a lot of the Smith family, are descendants of Harriet Hughes. And they hold frequent family reunions. I'm sure COVID has disrupted some of that, but they usually have them, I think, like every other year. And the Smith family was one of the largest families that Lakeland had. I believe they were greater than 15 Smiths that I grew up. And the fact that they have stayed connected and share the history of their family with each other and with us. And this one was held in the Lakeland community, the Smith family reunion. And I'm handing it off to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vi, and thank you everyone for tuning in and lending an hour and ear to hear Lakeland's story today. I too am a native Lakelander, and although I came of age in the neighborhood during the new millennium, I was surrounded by elders who had managed to stay in the community prior to urban renewal. It was their stories of Black identity and community that sparked my interest in African American history and how a place connects people through time. Thanks to the help of LCHP's partnership with University of Maryland for a digital archive, which Mary will talk about later, I had access to maps and documentation of the Lakeland neighborhood already collected, as well as connections to past residents displaced by urban renewal. In their stories, many Lakelanders expressed disappointment and resentment about urban renewal, often noting the process as the cause of destruction in the community. Although the urban renewal project brought amenities that benefited the College Park area, I often wondered about what Lakeland residents lost. How did a project meant to improve the community end up destroying it? I began my master's in 2018 to determine what role race and racism played in the urban renewal process and how the community and landscape was transformed by the project. And this is what you see here is a Washington Post article that was printed when the urban renewal project was officially passed in 1969. It details the history of the neighborhood and a couple of residents that still live there today. When the urban renewal plan was finalized in 1969, the project planned to upgrade 105 acres where 137 families lived. Although visual representations of the community and landscape prior to urban renewal are scarce, this map, included in the 1969 plan, details the community and landscape prior to destruction. Much of the documentation on the neighborhood is focused on urban renewal development. This reflects the neglect the community experienced during segregation and the hyper-focused attention it received as a development project. To the right, another Washington Post article announces the project's beginning in the city's largely Negro Lakeland section. However, by 1973, due to administration and funding changes, as well as damage done by Hurricane Agnes, the project timeline and budget was disrupted. Although Lakeland is not pictured here, oral histories remember Hurricane Agnes as the worst flooding in the neighborhood's history, causing damage to multiple homes, mainly in the east and central areas of the neighborhood. This Washington Post article details damage done in the DC area, as well as damage done in the Lakeland neighborhood. After the first demolitions began in 1974, about 65 households in Lakeland were displaced as their home was designated as blight. The municipal scene clipping on the right recalls the very first demolition in Lakeland on Navajo Street, while the map on the left utilizes QGIS to overlay a map of Lakeland's original 1890 plats with a map of planned acquisitions that were due to substandard structures or blighted uses. So you can kind of see the faint lines of the 1890 plat map, and these thicker, bold lines and shaded in areas are what was designated as substandard structures or blighted homes. By the end of urban renewal in the late 1980s, the project had not only destroyed 104 family homes, but most of the residents' familiars' landmarks, making it difficult to locate where homes and structures once stood. Lakelanders were not only neglected during segregation, but the land they had cultivated was used to contribute to the city and university's development by providing student housing rather than resident homes. However, Lakeland's story is not unique, and the urban renewal historiography includes other well-known historically Black neighborhoods whose Black residents were relocated and displaced from city centers. Lakeland's story may not be unique, but its story and history demonstrates how to be a good neighbor by taking our neighbors' needs into account in development, in decisions, and in community. Sorry, I think these are slides we forgot to take out. But if you would, sorry. There we go. I'm handing it over to Mary. Oh, you're muted, Mary.
Thanks. Duh. Thank you so much. And, you know, I'm delighted to be a part of this Good Neighbor Day panel. So like I said before, I'm going to focus mainly on the Lakeland Community Heritage Project and our biggest undertaking recently, the Lakeland Digital Archive. So next slide. So the Lakeland Community Heritage Project, or LCHP as we call it fondly and shortly, is an all-volunteer historical and heritage society of Lakeland residents of what we call the Lakeland diaspora, that is the people who were displaced by urban renewal, most of whom still live around, or many of whom still live in Prince George's County or moved to Prince George's County, and friends. LCHP incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit organization in 2008. Its mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the heritage and history of those African Americans who created, lived in, and or had association with the Lakeland community of Prince George's County, Maryland, from the late 19th century to the present. So the best sources of information on Lakeland right now are LCHP's website, lakelandchp.com. I have a slide of that later on. This book, Lakeland African Americans in College Park, which was assembled by members of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project and published in 2009. And the soon to be published Lakeland Digital Archive, which we are expecting pretty confidently now will be ready for some visitors very early in 2022. So everyone you're hearing talk today in this panel, except Mr. Thurston, is part of the team supporting the Lakeland Digital Archive. And as I said before, we consider Mr. Thurston an honorary member of our team because we work very closely with him. And he is also a member of the Lakeland Community Heritage Project. So the Lakeland Digital Archive is a community-centered approach to sharing history and heritage. And I do want to acknowledge with the next slide briefly that the archive team has received 2 grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities in 2019. Oops, I think there's a Lakeland, an NEH slide in there somewhere. Yeah, great, perfect. So we're very, very grateful for that important funding and support. And in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the activities this funding from NEH enabled us to do. So next slide on the team. Back up one, please. Yeah, perfect. The Lakeland Archive really goes back to the very early 2000s, around 2002, when volunteers were in the very, very beginning stages of thinking about putting together some work to archive and document the history of Lakeland and to begin collecting photographs for the book Lakeland African Americans in College Park. And people began digitizing materials from the very beginning. The central players in the Lakeland Digital Archive team are Lakelanders and members of LCHP. So LCHP owns and oversees the archive, but the team has also included folks from the University of Maryland and from the City of College Park and friends who have joined forces with LCHP and others to collect materials as the archive has grown. So I joined the team in 2009, and at that time I began to offer heritage studio type American Studies courses in which students would work with LCHP members to build the archive. And with different projects over a number of years, we collected more digitized materials. Students recorded oral histories. They collected photographs, newspaper clippings, maps, land records, census data, a lot of different things to add to the archive. And then in 2017, the Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities at UMD, or MITH, came on board, and they now host the digital archive, and they are working to build the new database and web interface for the Lakeland Digital Archive, as well as sort of building a systematic way of bringing new digital donations into the archive. So it's a more complex team. A vital part of the archive is what we call the LCHP UMD Community University Collaboration. Next slide. And I want to emphasize that we put community before university there and LCHP before UMD. A strong motivation for me when I joined Lakelanders to assist with building the archive was to model a very equitable collaboration process to ensure that Lakelanders can gather, research, archive, and disseminate their own history and heritage, and at the same time maintain their control over that process while working with faculty and students from the predominantly white institution across the street. So the slide summarizes what we believe is an alternative mode of heritage practice, kind of in a nutshell. Our first principle puts Lakelanders and Lakeland at the center of everything we do. The UMD programs provide labor and guidance to assist Lakelanders to document, archive, and interpret their history, but we try to keep that interpretation, and we do keep that interpretation in Lakelanders' own voices. So we work quite interactively. Typically, members of LCHP will develop the idea for a project or charge us with a mission, and then everybody gets to work on it. Currently, we're meeting in some fashion weekly for consultation and feedback, really focusing now on trying to get the archive ready for public consumption. So we aspire to, and LCHP expects and demands an equitable practice. So let me say as background that a typical preservation project will send trained experts in to do research and to tell a community what is significant about its heritage and its built environment and history. And we really try to just flip that power dynamic. Recognizing that Lakelanders are the experts about their own community. Lakeland residents, current and former, understand better than outsiders how to preserve or commemorate their heritage. And while UMD partners may advise, we work hard to stay centered on Lakelanders' knowledge and recommendations. So the team keeps the interests of Lakeland and Lakelanders at the center of our efforts and the decision-making with Lakeland current and former residents. So next slide. So I want to give you a taste of one of the most, what I found anyway, one of the most exciting parts of the LDA teamwork that I've experienced. Our first NEH grant funded community digitization events that we held in fall 2019. So we had a series of free community digitization days that LCHP and the team held at the College Park Community Center in fall 2019 in order to invite Lakelanders and make it easy for them to bring household photographs and records and letters and memorabilia, to have that digitized and hopefully to donate it to the Lakeland Digital Archive. So these were wonderful events. They were held over 2 weekends in September and October 2019. But figuring out how to actually do a massive community digitization event was challenging. And we worked through every step of the process, kind of choreographing how to do it. And the chart you see in the background there is sort of our flow chart of the different components and stations of that process during those really interesting days. And in the foreground, you see a set of instructions. We had a set of instructions at every station to help people stay focused on what they needed to do or troubleshoot if they ran into a problem with the digitization. So we really practiced this. I apologize for the phone call in the background. We practiced this pretty much every week during the summer and fall until we got this process worked out well. So next slide. So we had about 7 stations arranged in a room in the community center. And the first one we're looking at here, it was sort of our intake table to determine what people had brought, how many items, and to begin our tracking process for entering the items people had brought to be digitized and donated to the archive into our tracking system. And next slide. We had both scanning stations and a camera station. This sort of big box that you see at the far left was our camera station. So we could digitize, regularly formatted 8.5 by 11 type documents, but also larger documents. And next slide. We had an interview table where we interviewed, we videoed the materials people had brought and interviewed the donors to record their voices as they described what they had brought, the who, what, why, where, when, what meaning these materials had for them. And then we had a metadata station where staffers recorded that information as they listened to it into our tracking database. And if there are people here who are interested in what that tracking base might have been, we use Airtable. And next slide. Then we had a kind of quality control and post-processing station. This is Fiona Dolan, a student from the iSchool, an undergraduate student who did a lot of post-processing work for us. And here we checked to make sure that the scanning had come out okay, the color was right, we made adjustments, trimming, and then we provided each donor with a thumb drive with their digitized materials. And then there was a final conservation table where team members returned the originals to the donor. So originals stayed with the donors, and provided acid-free folders or acid-free boxes and containers for storing, acid-free sleeves for photographs to protect them. And we made recommendations about conserving the historical family records and materials that people had brought. And then we had a few staff members who were greeters and thankers and troubleshooters who wandered around helping various of us with whatever we needed help with. So it actually was a crew of about 15 or 16 people every day to make this happen. People to staff every station. As I said, we met weekly to train how to do this, how to track items into our system, how to scan, how to use the camera station, how to record metadata, how to do the interviews, every step of our process. In 4 community digitization days, we digitized just under 1,300 images. They included, in one case, a whole book, photographs, portraits, scrapbooks, yearbooks. We had some large portraits of wedding photographs, funeral programs, newspaper clippings, and report cards, and many other things. So it was a great deal of fun over those 2 weekends. And we would have done more if the pandemic hadn't intervened. And so we'll gear up to continue doing that digitization in the future, because an important part of what we feel like we accomplished in the community digitization days was adding to the archive, of course, but building LCHP's capacity to do this kind of work without the assistance of the technical folks at the university. And one of the things that came out of this is that we have, courtesy of NEH, a sort of we conceptualized it as archival materials in a backpack, but it's actually archival materials in a humongous rolling bag. So we can actually take this material to people's houses or wherever they would like to meet to continue to digitize people's personal papers and photographs and add them to the archive, or just give them back to them in the future. So I hope that gives you a little taste of how we're building the Lakeland Digital Archive. The team is currently working on preparing 2 collections of digitized items that people will be able to preview early in 2022. photographs from our book, Lakeland, African Americans in College Park, and they document the history and culture of Lakelanders. And then we're also working on a second collection, which includes key documents about the urban renewal process that Courtney talked about. So please come back to LCHP's website in early 2022 to see a link to those collections, which we hope will be the first of many. And thank you so much for listening. And I'll turn things over to Mr. Robert Thurston.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Hayden, for putting this together, and thank the audience for your time and attention to this matter. My position, as I said, has been said, is the Lakeland Civic Association president. But before I get to that, I just want to thank those that have presented before, and to also give a little context to what I'm about to say. Starting with Ms. Vi. I'm a little jealous of all those who are listening, because you're getting today history and information that has taken me over 30 years to really grasp and understand. I am very proud to have been in Lakeland for over 30 years, have had 4 generations of quote unquote Thurstons, although we aren't original Lakelanders, but we feel like we have been because of how we have been accepted. With that being said, the story of Lakeland kind of escaped me, because when we moved here, I kind of felt like we had found a little piece of heaven. I had kids here who are now first generation Lakelanders that I'm also proud of. And as you can see in their involvement, I think they're proud of their upbringing as well, being in Lakeland. But when I moved in, on the street that I live on, I was actually the only person on that street that was not somehow related, going back to what Ms. Vi said. So that was one piece of it that kind of resonated. The other piece of it was just how interconnected the neighborhood was and how self-sufficient it was. It was my goal that I would retire around a university. I must admit that I didn't see it as University of Maryland, because when we moved in, it was the University of Maryland and the rest of College Park. All of that has changed in the last 20 years. I am now retired and I don't plan to go anywhere. But to the Lakeland vision, I think around 2020, some of you may be familiar with the University College Park, University of Maryland partnership. Well, they've had a vision. First, they had the vision 2020, and then they were preparing the vision for 2030. At that particular time, the Civic Association wanted to kind of present what it thought it would like to be in the future as part of that vision. It was just really initially going to be how we were going to proceed to get the greater community involved in what we were doing. The Heritage Project was really just starting to get the archives together, so we felt like we had enough data and information to kind of justify and validate what was happening and had happened in Lakeland. So we prepared this vision. Unfortunately, there was then the demise of Mr. Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And because of that, the city of College Park made a proclamation. And because the Lakeland vision statement was in circulation at that point, and also because our president of the Lakeland Civic Heritage Project kind of made the council aware, they included Lakeland as part of their intent to try to restore justice. And that happened to be the beginning statement of the Lakeland vision. Lakeland I will read. Lakeland is a historical designated community where meaningful processes of restorative justice have been and are being realized. At the time that was written, that was our vision. As we sit today, that is something that is starting to be realized, in that the city has started the restorative justice process. So with that, we had some strategic areas, all again, which kind of mirrored what the city was focused, or the 2030 vision of the university partnership had as their objectives. Part of that was just to show that Lakeland really wasn't any different than in other areas of the city, but that our needs were probably as significant, if not more significant, than others. Because what we are talking about with Lakeland, there's only a third of what used to be Lakeland remaining. Lake Artemisia, as Courtney pointed out in the map, used to be a residential area of Lakeland, and housing used to go right up to Route 1 in Lakeland. So all of that was part of the community. Sustainability is a very big one, because because of our proximity to the university, and our history, and that's where the intersection kind of meets. Right now, what's happening in Lakeland is I'm going to say, because of our history, there's not a lot of intergenerational maintaining homes in the neighborhood now. There's been a lot of hurt and pain, and many people just don't feel welcome in an area that they were told to leave and lied about their ability to come back. So a lot of our residents are aging out because of the Lakeland history of being a predominantly Black neighborhood, and the racism that prevailed in the country. Many of the homes and the stock within Lakeland was deemed uninhabitable, but the reason why it was uninhabitable was because they couldn't get resources to create and develop. So there's a piece of generational wealth that has been lost there as well. So what we have left, we're trying to sustain. And I don't know if any of you, especially the university students, have heard, but it's a great place for university students to have off-campus housing, which we welcome as neighbors, and we've had good experiences with that. The problem is that many of these homes that were once deemed inhabitable are now being converted to multi-livable homes for student base, which means once the students no longer want to live there, it's really not a house that an individual buyer would consider moving into, as well as where it went, what we're starting off with to what the investor is building up is really probably also cost prohibitive. So we're kind of in a state of trying to sustain what we have and also revitalize and redevelop in the community. Next slide, please. Right now, we are not necessarily a federally historic designated area, but we have gotten the message out to the point where people realize the history that this area provides. Ms. Vi alluded to it a little bit before, but if you lived anywhere south of Baltimore, probably north of Calvert County, west of Montgomery County, and probably some of Montgomery County up until 1950, and you were Black and fortunate enough to go to middle and high school, Lakeland was probably your resource to obtain that, because that's where the high school was there. I mentioned the housing density. It's very low dense housing. It's been safe, heritage, celebrated area, and we are trying to become interconnected and inclusive to the city and the University of Maryland, which all is becoming very real to us It doesn't seem to be a vision. It seems like it's going to be a realization that we continue to have to work towards, and we're trying to get as many partners as we possibly can to assist in that. Next slide. Just a little bit more details about the strategic area. In transportation, Lakeland is a undesigned cul-de-sac. And I say undesigned cul-de-sac because we are bound by the railroad tracks, and we do not really have access to any other roadway except for Route 1. So we are trying to, and in addition to that, as I mentioned before, what used to be a part of Lakeland, Lake Artemisia, we as the community have very poor access to it, which also means our trail access is not as amenable as we would like for it to be. In education, again, trying to continue to get the word out. We would like to have more programming at the College Park Community Center, and I'm going to say that they have been a great partner over the years. One of the pictures that was shown earlier was the ability of Park and Planning to agree to have the Lakeland mural put on the side of the College Park Community Center. Paint Branch Elementary is a school that sits in the middle of Lakeland, has history along with Lakeland, and we think it's important that there is some participatory involvement between the elementary school and the city, both from trying to have reading days and educating them on the history of Lakeland, but also to know that out in front of their building is the Derby Lomax Fountain, which is the first and only Black mayor of College Park, and was instrumental in the early 70s in Lakeland's activities. The University of Maryland Partnership has been and continues to be a growing and fruitful effort. Dr. Cease was a little less forthcoming in saying that when she first started with this project, she makes it sound like the University of Maryland has always been backing, but this was her heart and her effort to get involved and bring the University of Maryland along where she could. And she's done an awesome job with that, and to the point where today it's something that is pretty well commonplace, but it wasn't that long ago that it was not. Public safety, community policing, and the communication has always been important for us. The public safety for Lakeland really is the safety of the city of College Park, because we value the trail, and we want to make sure that it remains safe and secure for anyone that's traveling along that. And we are set on trying to maintain that safety in that particular area, as well as throughout the Lakeland community. We have a very good relationship with University of Maryland Police Department. They are very strong participants in our National Night Out every year in August, and hope that that will continue. Just a little bit, sustainability, as I mentioned before. Can you slide it up just a little bit, Courtney, or is it? If not, that's okay. With sustainability, as I mentioned before, we're really trying to get the university and the greater city of College Park to help us to sustain what bit of the community we have left, and as much as we possibly can, we would like to try to begin to restore it to some of the activities that we had in yesteryear. But not have it just an exclusive but be more inclusive to the city. We had to operate in a bubble before because of the surrounding areas, but we want to share that with the greater city of College Park. The revitalization and redevelopment, it was mentioned before about the diaspora. One of my biggest goals in the sustainability and revitalization of Lakeland is to create a place where those who have been harmed and have no longer had the ability to come back to Lakeland have a place to come back to. My ideal location would be the Lakeland High School, which sits at the end of the street, but we don't want to, we're not trying to kick anyone out, but we definitely want to maintain the structure that's there. So in the future, that might be something that we can have as a historical location and a community learning center for not only the College Park, but for the greater city. I mean, not only for Lakeland, but for the greater city. Next slide. Right now, as I mentioned before, there is the Lakeland Restorative Justice process going on with the city of Lakeland. It was where we stand right now is we have just submitted. The Restorative Justice Steering Committee was responsible for creating the structure for a Restorative Justice Commission. The Steering Committee has submitted their findings and recommendations to the City of College Park, and we are expecting those processes to begin in the very short term, and we are looking for anyone and everyone that would like to be a part of that process. The way to start, if you're interested, is to maybe start out with the survey that's listed with the QR code attached, and there will be plenty of ways for all to be involved. Thank you for your time. Hayden, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you all so much to all the participants. I know I felt that that was incredibly informative and information that we all need to keep in mind, be aware of, and take with us following this presentation. We have another about 8 minutes until we're supposed to wrap up, and I received a couple private questions on the chat mechanism. So if those individuals want to either send those in the main chat right now, or feel free to unmute and ask your questions, I think our panelists would be happy to answer them. All right, we have a question in the chat that I'll read aloud, and then looks like it's directed towards Mr. Thurston. How has the University of Maryland gone beyond acknowledgement of generational racist harm and toward sustained reparations for the Lakeland community?
Well, I would say the university has been a key player in helping us to organize, to identify Lakeland specifically. I would say that has not happened yet. I know that the 1890 project, I forget what it's called.
1856.
1856 has been something that has been worked on, and I know Ms. Vi and I think Dr. Cease have been involved in that, if they want to chime in on that.
The 1856 project, I think, is good, and it's going to be a great source to actually show the importance of the Lakeland community, not just Lakeland community, but other communities that helped build and sustain the university, but had not always been acknowledged. So we hope in doing the 1856 project, certainly some of this will be corrected, that we, as Lakelanders and other communities, we will finally get acknowledgement of what our contributions were and grow from there.
And I would just add that the 1856 committee has a research division that focuses on Lakeland and African-American communities and African-Americans' contributions to the University of Maryland, not just during the era of enslavement, but coming all the way up to the present. Ms. Sharps-Jones and Ms. Maxine Gross and I are involved in that subcommittee, and I'm sure others will follow. And we're at the very, very beginnings of this process, but we have a plan and some ideas of how we want to do the research. We're hoping there's a lot of material in the UMD archives that can help us understand the longer term relationship between Lakeland and other African-American communities along Route 1 and the university. I will say, I think it's been a very fraught relationship between UMD and Lakeland for 100 years or more. I think that there are efforts in the university now to begin to address that, but I don't want to say to Brian that we've gone too far along that process of sustained reparations for the Lakeland community. I think the work that we put into trying to educate students about Lakeland, to the helping to build the Lakeland Community Heritage Project and the Lakeland Digital Archive are a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done. Much more needs to be done. And it's, let's acknowledge that history of ignoring and exploiting Lakeland and, allowing violence against Lakelanders to occur through the urban renewal process. It's a long, ugly history, but I think people are actively working now, and I'm very excited about the restorative justice process and the recommendations that are just coming out now, and hope that we will see something going forward that really acknowledges the city's role and the county's role in urban renewal, and gives Lakelanders a chance to talk about the harms that were done. I think that's truth and reconciliation work that needs to occur, and the university needs to be a central part of that because it was a part of it.
I would also add that I think all of us that are involved really have a piece of the involvement, just curious about the sustainability of Lakelanders and how they were able to survive. I say that to say that the University of Maryland's history is a very interesting one to explore. There is an oral history that I personally heard of one of our Lakelanders who thought he was going to go to the University of Maryland because his relatives actually worked in the kitchen. He was able to meet with the president, thought he was going to sign his enrollment, but the president told him that he was going to University of Maryland, but it was going to be, I think it was Prince Anne College at that point. And to further that, because it was part of the University of Maryland, it was President Curly Byrd, which I think we all know had a very segregated past. When he would go to Prince Anne, he would take a crisp $20 bill and give it to that gentleman so that he could survive, and told him that it was from his uncles and aunts, which they knew nothing about. So it's that type of stuff that I'd like to dig into so that we can celebrate and start to correct some wrongs there.
Thank you all. Do we have any other questions from participants before we begin to wrap up?
Great question, by the way, Brian. Thanks for asking it.
I would encourage everyone to stay involved. Please keep your ears in tune so that we can continue this process, and we hope that we have gained some more advocates in it.
Yes, please consider this. If this is like the first you're hearing of the Lakeland community and the Urban Renewal Project, consider it only the beginning. The Lakeland Community Heritage Project website and the Civic Association all have great resources online that are easily accessible to stay involved and informed on what's going on. So I wanted to thank everyone again so much for coming, and a special thank you to all of our panelists who volunteered their time to come speak to everyone today. And if you all are participating in any other Good Neighbor Day events, wish you the best of luck, and I hope that they are a positive experience. And that's all. If we have any other closing comments, feel free, but otherwise, thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody, for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Hayden.
Appreciate it.